and he drank mate. But every time there was a general authority coming to Argentina, people were scared that they would say no mate.
Oh,
I'll just continue drinking mate.
Good. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I am trying to get us live right now.
I think we might be.
I think we might be live. Beautiful.
Did it.
I'm very proud of us. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you both so much for being here. Today, I am joined by Yamile Saied Mendez and Christian McKay Heidicker, and we are going to be talking about Mendez's new book, Furia. Yes, very exciting. It is her first young adult book, but not the first book that she's written. She's written many other books for younger writers. Furia was recently selected by Reese Witherspoon as her second ever YA book club pick, which is very exciting. And if you want to check out more of Yamile's work, you should check out her website at yamilesmendez.com. And you can order Furia through our bookstore at wellerbookworks.com, over the phone at 801-328-2586. And you can also buy copies in store. And today, Yamile will be interviewed by Christian Heidicker. They're both local writers. Christian wrote the Newbery Honor-winning Scary Stories for Young Foxes, as well as Thieves of Weirdwood, Cure for the Common Universe, and Attack of the 50-Foot Wallflower. And you can check out more of Christian's work at cmheidicker.com and also order his books through us. And then before I turn it over to the two of you, I just wanted to go over a few of our upcoming events this month. Next Wednesday on October 7th, we have two other young adult writers, Becky Wallace and Abigail Johnson, and they'll be talking about their new books, Far From Normal and Girl on the Run. The day after, on October 8th, we have Edward Power and Craig Gordon talking about Dragons in the Snow, which is a really interesting nonfiction book about avalanche search and rescue and backcountry skiing. And then every other Wednesday, we do a virtual lit knit, which is what it sounds like. You know, you get your sewing projects and get crafty and just chat about your days. It's always really fun. The next one's going to be October 14th. And then throughout the rest of the month, we're doing some events in conjunction with the Utah Humanities Book Festival. On the 19th, Zahar Mustafa will be promoting her book, The Beauty of Your Face. And then on the 21st, we have a poetry reading and conversation with Linda Hogan and Paisley Rechtel. And now I am going to disappear for a sec. I'll still be around. We're going to end with a Q&A session from our Facebook audience, but I will turn the time over to Christian to ask some questions for Yamile.
Thank you so much, Salem. I'm so happy to be here today, and I feel extremely honored that I get to interview my dear friend Yamile. Haven't been able to see her in, 8 months.
Since we got together to celebrate your book.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That was
the world fell apart. Yes. I'm glad that we could have that moment before, everything crashed down. So I don't know if you can tell from my deadline beard and deadline hair and deadline eyes, but I am on deadline. So I'm only halfway through Furia, but I love it so far.
I love it.
So yeah, I adore it. I have always been a fan of your work. You stood out to me when we first met at Writers and Readers for Young Readers and Writers and Illustrators for Young Readers.
Yes.
Got it. Yes.
Wifer.
We usually call it Wifer, and I was like, well, don't call it Wifer for the audience because they won't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
But then I decided to try the acronym, and you still don't know what we're talking about. It's this amazing conference for children's authors, and I'm going to ask Yamile some questions about that in just a bit. So to jump right in, I actually read the first couple chapters, three chapters in Andy Ellis's class 10 years ago. And then it was just published. This book was just published last year. And I'm wondering how a book evolves over the course of a decade. And if you are happy or frustrated that it took that long.
I love this question because especially because I wasn't like Salem said at the beginning, Furia is not my first published book, but it was the first book that I started working on with desire to be published. And yes, for several years, or at several different points in those years, there was a lot of frustration because I would hear amazing feedback about the writing and the storyline and a lot of encouragement. In fact, I was one of the inaugural Walter Dean Myers grants recipients over a chapter from Furia that I had sent back in 2015. And still, I had a very hard time finding a home for it. On the other side of the coin, I always like to think that even though I already had the full story in my mind and I knew what I wanted it to be, I did not have the skills as a writer to tell it and show it and make it justice the way I did. I loved Furia. In fact, the first two chapters that you read, Christian, pretty much remain intact. And I remember just moving the first line, lies have short legs. That used to be the last line of the first paragraph.
Wow.
It used to start, I don't know where the saying came from. And then you actually gave me the feedback. Why don't you move this sentence to the beginning? And there you go. Now that is the first line. And pretty much that first page and the first couple of chapters have remained the same throughout countless. Like I really do not even know how many drafts I went through. I know I went through 4 drafts with my editor in the last 2 years before Furia was published. But before then, I had been working on it for so long. At the beginning, the greatest challenge was to complete the manuscript because I kept going back to fix that first part over and over. Then I had to make myself just go ahead and tell the whole story. After that, I needed to learn how to revise and not just change commas from place to place. And the other part that I needed to learn was to trust in myself. Because of course, I workshopped this story so many times over the years, and the feedback was so contradictory at many times that I needed to. There is a time for feedback, and there is a time to put that feedback away and just go inside yourself and trust in your instincts and wonder what you really want to say, and trusting that you can say it. And that's what ended up happening. But I reached that point only until I knew that I had learned the tools of my craft, that I had kind of ended the apprenticeship of being Furia's author, and actually I began to do it. I also matured. When I started writing Furia, I was still in my 20s. And I had to grow as a woman, as a person, as a mother. When I started it, my kids were all babies. Now they're Camila's age, which is super freaky. and so, but at the same time, I could not look at this character as if she were my child or as if she were myself. She was her own separate entity. But I had to grow as a person and as a writer before I could do her justice, and then let her do her thing. And that was a process that took a long time. And that's a process that I could control. It was pretty much the only thing that I could control, the writing process of it, and the workshopping and the revising, and then putting it out there. I had zero control over the market. 10 years ago, although there were already voices asking for diverse books, We Need Diverse Books didn't exist yet. The organization started in the year 2015. And although, again, I had a lot of positive feedback, I was told over and over that there was no market for a story about a girl from a different country, from a barrio in a different country who wanted to play soccer. And I feel like the external things that happened, the US national team winning their 4th World Cup, and all the success and the Me Too movement that gave people kind of like an understanding of what Ni Una Menos, that the movement that started in Latin America again in 2015. I think that was such a pivotal year for so many reasons. It gave people a point of reference to be able to understand all these things that were going on in my story, until the market was finally ready for Furia to come out, and then for even Reese Witherspoon to choose it as part of her book club, because that has been so surreal, that a story that is so personal and now has the opportunity to find such a wider audience. So that's a long answer, but I think it was complete.
It was beautiful. It just overflowing with wisdom, and the fact that idea that there was no market for international characters playing soccer was just disproven like that.
Yes.
It's really amazing. I first of all, I'm really impressed that those first 2 chapters have remained more or less the same over the last decade, because I don't think that there's a single sentence that you read in that class of mine that I would ever let see the light of day. That's amazing. I'm also, I think that you captured it really well, that idea of how to worship the words. And that comes late for an author, doesn't it? Like learning how to adore it into being, as opposed to use your frustration as an energy that gets the words on the page. I love that, and I hope you don't mind if I use it in the future.
Of course, no, of course, I'd be honored.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple of the themes in this book that have been bolstered by recent events, and I'm kind of wondering how you approached those when you were writing it. Did it start out as just a desire to write about football and then draw in feminism and history and all these things? Did all those happen at the same time, or how did that work?
It was very interesting, because I always I started writing Furia out of a desire to go back home. Although I've been in the US for a long time now, more than half of my life, and there was a period of time that I wasn't able to go back home to Argentina for several reasons. The financial situation that ruined our economy in the early 2000s. I had 4 little kids, and it was really impractical to travel with them. And then my parents lived in Utah, which made it very impractical for me to go back to Argentina to visit. So I started writing Furia out of just homesickness. I wanted to be home. And the things that I missed the most from home were the things people sometimes would ask, oh my gosh, with all the terrible things that are happening in Argentina, what do you miss? And the truth is that I missed everything, and I still do. And although, again, Utah has been home for a long time, and I love Utah, the feeling that Diego and Camila talk about in the book about loving 2 places with the same intensity, they're very much a reflection of my own feelings of loving Utah, but loving and missing Rosario so much. And at the beginning, Furia, which was back then called Southern Cross, was about a girl who's trying to navigate life in this world dominated by football, of which men are the dominant players, figuratively and literally on the page and in real life. It wasn't until I realized that Camila wanted to be a soccer player that the story bloomed for me, and that I really found who she was. And now it seems so unfathomable to even conceive of Camila not playing football for me. But at the very, very iteration of it, she wasn't. She was just this girl whose brother was a professional soccer player, and the love of her life was a soccer player too. And I feel like once I knew that she was the football player, everything fell into place. And because we cannot separate feminism from soccer, from feminine soccer, I just had to mention those things because the reason we have a US national team that has won the World Cup for 4 times in a row is because of the labor of women who did the work in previous decades for women to have the right to play, and for our Supreme Court to pass these laws that say that women had equal opportunity to play the sport that they wanted. And now the fight that hasn't ended yet about receiving proper payment for their efforts, or equal payment even to the men's team who has not achieved even a fraction of what the women's have achieved. And in the same way, although Furia is not meant to be a political commentary on the or societal commentary on Argentine culture, it was impossible for me not to mention the Una Menos movement, because Camila is growing up in a society in which she's not safe, but the danger, the greatest danger for her life is in her own home. And that's something that sometimes society likes to look the other way, because it's too terrible to conceive, but that's how a lot of these girls that go missing every single day, every day there's a new girl, a new woman who most times their lives are ended by the people who are meant to protect them. So I had to weave these topics and do it in a way that they wouldn't overcome her personal journey. But her personal journey is just a little mirror of what's happening in society at large. So they had to be mentioned. And I also wanted to show how complicated it is sometimes for a girl who's fighting pretty much for her life every single day, and who sometimes doesn't feel like she has the power or the strength to be sucked into these social problems happening around her. And sometimes we say, I've heard people say, oh, I don't like politics. I just want to be friends with everybody. And they do it out of the goodness of their hearts, but those politics affect people's everyday lives and girls' rights and women's rights. And so whether she wanted it or not, because playing football is such a revolutionary act, her becoming a soccer player was a political statement already. And so it was a very delicate balance to weave in both sides without one overpowering the other.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance here, and I think that's why books like yours are so important, because they show us how intertwined these things are, and how easy it is for many people to walk through life without seeing the political underbelly of sports, and without seeing how charged people's lives and safety are just by following passions, following dreams.
Exactly.
That's really amazing. So one of my favorite parts about your writing are the sensory details, like the smell of green, or feeling a football smacking her in the face. And my favorite moment so far is when she keeps her toes anchored to the floor when Diego tries to sweep her up in a hug. Like, yeah. It's one of those brilliant writing moments where not only are my senses thrust into the scene and I can feel it and I can sense it, but I also understand her personality just by, like that many, just like 5 words. It's really, really strong stuff. And I'm wondering, when you write moments like that, are you remembering these from your past? Do you have to invent any, or do you do some method writing and go and lie in the grass, or have one of your kids hurl a football at your face?
I have had a football hurled in my face when I was very young. And in fact, my little boy was complaining yesterday because at a game yesterday, he was hit in the stomach. And I said, oh, I know the feeling. And it's kind of so surreal for him to imagine that I was once a little girl hit in the stomach by a soccer ball. But it is a combination of all of those things that you mentioned. Some of them are just memories, again, out of my homesickness. You don't know what you don't have until you miss it. So when I was living in Rosario, I never really paid attention to the smells of fall leaves or the greenness of mate or the smell of the river. And then every time I would go back home, these little moments would hit me with such force, and those would be the things that I would miss about being back in my barrio. I was there in Rosario just back in November, and I was working on the very final draft of Furia before we went to copy edits. And it's, you know, that feeling, Christian, it's all that weight on your shoulders that it has to be right because it's going to copy edit whether you want it or not. And again, I've been working on this book for more than 10 years, but it was never gonna, if it was up to me, it was never going to be ready. I was never gonna send it out, but it had to be done. And I was ready for this book to be out there. So I had to let it go. But that last November was my last chance to go back to the river. And I was actually revising chapter 10, which is when Diego and Camila go on a date. And oh my gosh, I saw things as if I were seeing them for the first and the last time, because that's what I feel when I go to Argentina. I never know if it's gonna be the last time I go and see the river and notice the birds or the different trees or how food tastes so different. And so I did try to just pour all of those feelings on the page. And of course, I'm a wordy person. So my editor chased me with little scissors cutting words, and I had to very conscious effort of what was the most important for me, detail for me to keep on the page to make such an impact. And that's the beauty of revision, because sometimes when I'm writing, I like to pour all of that on the page, and you have to find that perfect balance, because too little and your reader is left wanting, too much and they're bored to death and they start skipping the things that you so lovingly crafted. So there has to be that balance of giving the reader enough that they can get a taste, but not too much that you're just dumping on this information so that they can fill in the blanks. Because I'm sure some of those things that made an impact or resonated with you are because they threw you back to a memory that you already had of something similar. And that's what I was hoping to trigger, something in the reader's personal life that would let them fill in the blanks that I was not, of the words that I wasn't saying or writing. And so that, and that's when reading and writing becomes such a collaborative experience, because your experience reading Furia will be very different from that of a girl from my barrio who has seen these things with her own eyes, or from a grown person who's an expat in Spain and hasn't been to Rosario for 30 years. So, and that's the magic of it. So I do try to be very conscious about it, specifically when I'm revising, because there are some parts that I need to add a little more, and again, many other parts in which I need to cut.
I think you did find that perfect balance, because everything flashed so clearly in my head and gave me memories that have never been mine. So I think it was deftly handled.
Yes, and another way that we can do this as a writer is to consume a lot of stories through books or movies. I am a very visual writer, I feel like, because I love movies. And so the things that I have not experienced by myself, I just feeling with my very powerful imagination. And I think that is my one strength as an artist, is that I just have a vivid imagination. That's why when my kids call mommy, my mind always will go to the worst case scenario. And they're like, how did you make that movie in your mind in 3 seconds? I'm like, well, that's who I am.
This is the curse of being a good writer. Your mind creates horrors. Okay, so no spoilers here, but I kind of swooned during the Diego scene.
I'm happy to hear that.
That's it. That's the question. It
This
just, I was like,
as I wrote all those scenes.
it's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this, Diego.
I'm so happy to hear because I really worked on that relationship that was so important. And it's funny because, of course, as a writer, my agent is always telling me, don't read the reviews, but it's kind of impossible when people tag you all the time.
Yes.
And some of the reviews, people were like, oh my gosh, there was not enough of the love story. And in others, oh, I did not want the boy to be in that story. But I see how he was pivotal in showing Camila's journey. And the relationship between them was completely indulgent because he's my teenage dream. But at the same time, it was a very calculated, he was a very calculated ploy in the story because he personified a lot of the things that stood in the way of Camila achieving her goals. And that's something else that I wanted to show, that sometimes it is very easy, not very easy, but it's easier to resist the things that we know are going to be hurtful for us because they're inherently bad or harmful. But when it's something that is good and pure and beautiful, those things are hard to resist. And that's what Diego was for her. He is a good guy, and the love they do have is a real love. But sometimes that can be the greatest obstacle of all. And at the same time, there is a part in the story that Camila is wondering why she cannot have both. Like for a boy, the decision to have the person that they love next to them is not a hard one. But for a girl, it's so complicated.
Wow, that's really well said. I certainly couldn't resist Diego, so I don't know how. Chance. Argentinian history is expertly woven throughout your world, and it feels so natural that I'm absorbing it without feeling like I'm sitting through a history lesson. And two of the pieces that really stand out to me are the Saint Difunta Correa,
Yes.
who was found dead but breastfeeding a live baby, and so is known for miracles. And then Los Incorregibles.
Yes, incorregible.
Those at home impressed by my pronunciation shouldn't be, because I checked with Yamile before we started talking.
You have a great accent, so I was.
I don't know about that. So this is a hospital for misbehaving women.
Yes.
And I know that you have learned even more about that since then. I'd love to hear about it. But does the layering of these pieces of history and culture happen naturally, or does it come over many drafts? And did you know about them when you were a kid?
So I've always known about La Difunta Correa because just growing up and going on drives, again, when my brothers had games all over the region, we would drive to their games, and in the highways, you see these altars or shrines next to the road. Usually there's a cross and there's the figurine of the mother breastfeeding her child, and then bottles of water surrounding. And then people also leave other offerings like a soccer ball when a boy particularly, usually, gets his dream of becoming a professional soccer player, or when a bride gets married to the love of her life, she will leave the bridal dress as an offering. So I've always been fascinated, and I'm not a Catholic. I grew up a Catholic, and I've always been just fascinated by the power of people's faith in a country that, with corruption and financial ruin happening in like a very stable cycle. That's the only thing stable about the financial ruin is how it changes every 2 or 3 years. That's the only thing that you know about it, but you never know which way it's gonna go. And people keep going. I don't know how they do it, but Argentine people are still optimistic and they keep going about their lives. And I feel like the Difunta Correa, being the patron saint of impossible things, you would only come to her with a request when there's no one else to answer your prayer. And she was the perfect person for Camila to ask. I also like her story because when she lost her life, she had been trying to rescue her husband from the army who had taken him as a conscript. And so I just love the idea of a woman just saying, I'm gonna go and save him, even when she had her little newborn baby. And even when she couldn't save the husband, her son survived, and she keeps saving people through the centuries. And then in the case of Las Incorregibles, there has always been an El Buen Pastor in my novel in one iteration or another, but the school and the home where Diego was raised and where Camila will go on to mentor the little children there in the story, I feel like I saw the church and the jail or the hospital when I was a very young girl. I must have gone on a field trip or something and I forgot consciously, but something stayed inside me. Because when I started doing research to make sure that I had my street location right, in this exact same neighborhood where I imagined El Buen Pastor, I realized there is un Buen Pastor, which was founded in 1898 and which served as a hospital where families would send their disobedient daughters, and they were called the incorrigibles. And then when it was the case of a grown woman, they were called las menopáusicas, the menopausic ones. And this just happened. I mean, the El Buen Pastor functioned well into the 70s, and there are rumors that it also worked as a detention center during the dictatorship in the late 70s, where atrocities were committed. And where just women were sent because they wanted to vote, they wanted a higher payment at work, or they resisted their bosses' advances. And so they were just put there as unwanted in society. And like what Camila says at the very beginning, what she says to Diego is that if El Buen Pastor had been functioning today as a depository for unwanted daughters, she would have ended up there. So she recognizes how society has evolved in a little way. But although she's not sent there physically, she is deemed as this incorrigible daughter and disobedient daughter and stubborn. And I just wanted to flip the notion of those being bad characteristics that girls have to get rid of, and instead turn that concept upside down and encourage girls and women to remain incorrigible, because the only way that we are going to fulfill our dreams or reach our potentials or whatever nice motto you want to use is to not follow all those rules that society imposes arbitrarily for us. That if it hadn't been for the incorrigibles, we would not have feminine soccer, we would not have women in positions of power, we would not have women being able to leave their homes and have a job, or choose to stay at home with their kids, or make any decisions like open a bank account or that kind of thing. So the rights that we have today came about because of the labor of those incorrigibles from the past. And that's it. And those things, you know, it's funny because again, I knew about those, about El Buen Pastor, and I knew about La Difunta Correa. In fact, I had La Difunta Correa in a very different story and manuscript, and it didn't work there. So I just took that piece of the puzzle and it fit perfectly in Furia. And it's funny how sometimes those things happen, because I don't know if I would have made the connection between La Difunta Correa and Camila 12 years ago. But then as I was trying to fill a hole in the story, I realized I already had that puzzle piece. It was in a different story. It had just been waiting for me to be ready to see how it fit perfectly here. So I just love how the creative process works sometimes, that Your brain will plant a seed in a different plot, and when it's ready, it'll tell you, okay, now you can graft it into this other place
Yeah.
where it belongs.
Yeah, there is an amazing resonance in that image of a boy winning a football match and setting a ball next to a saint who sacrificed her life to rescue her husband and her son. Meanwhile, there's a building down the street where women are taken for disobeying men. It's like this very safe, almost insulting way of revering women for their sacrifices, but not when it comes to estampas. And these idols and everything, but not in the real world.
Exactly. Yes, it's that disconnect.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me that you took her from a different story, and yeah, like this is the only book there. This is the book where she truly resonate and bring those themes to life. Okay, now for some softball questions. How are you different from Camila? How are you the same? And did you want to play football professionally? And how did that evolve into writing?
Yes, I always wanted to play. I always say that when people ask you as a writer, is this your dream job? It is, because it allows me to live experiences that I didn't have an access to before. And so I was not allowed to be a soccer player, not because my parents were these horrible people, but they wanted the best of me. And the best, in their opinion, was for me to get an education. And so soccer, what it has, and I think the appeal that it has in developing nations, is that you only need a ball. Sometimes it does not even need to be a ball that you buy in the store. Kids will make a ball out of a ratty shirt and they tie it with tape and they will play it like that. And that's all you need. And then you just need at least two people, or sometimes not even that. Sometimes you can play with your dog, like my brothers had done, or you can play with against the wall. So it is a very accessible sport. So women in Argentina play sports. We have a very famous field hockey team, volleyball team. I wanted to do gymnastics as a kid, but my family didn't have the resources to send me to gymnastics or to field hockey. We didn't have the money. My parents had the resources to only give us so much. And what they gave me was the gift of the education and learning English. And so I will forever be grateful because they gave me all they could in that way. But in the same sense, now I can create my own virtual reality when I'm writing about a soccer player. And I have played later on, but never at the level that Camila has played. So we're very different in that way. I was very obedient when I was a little girl, when I was a teenager. But a lot of my obedience came from just not wanting to disappoint my mom. So this is not a spoiler because it's not part of the story, but in the acknowledgements at the end of the book, I do thank my mom for breaking the cycle. There's a lot of my mom in Camila. And that is my way to honor all the sacrifices she made to break the cycle of abuse and women not having the opportunities or not having the courage to take the reins of their own lives. My mom did, and I'll forever be grateful because my life is very different from what it could have been if I hadn't had her. It's also different in the sense that I didn't date a soccer player.
Shucks. All right. Well, I'll have to live vicariously through your character instead then, I guess. Follow-up question to how similar you are or are not to Camila. How does your husband feel about the line where she says that all Mormon missionaries look the same?
He laughed. He laughed. He's like, you put that there. I'm like, I did, because that is the truth. when I did not grow up LDS, but I remember seeing the Mormon missionaries in my neighborhood. In fact, I grew up in the same neighborhood that where Camila grows up, 7 de Septiembre, which was a government neighborhood of housing for workers of the metal factories. My dad did not work in a metal factory, but my godfather did. And when he got that apartment assigned, he already had a house, and because he was my godfather, he assigned it to his younger brother, my father. And so I remember very distinctly when we moved into this neighborhood, and it was everything brand new. It was just apartment buildings, and there was the Mormon missionaries were there giving out Book of Mormon. And I love books so much that I did not care what it was about. I just wanted a book. And I remember thinking, and they wouldn't give me one because I was 6 years old. And then the following year, they came back for another open house, and I took my mom along because I wanted that Book of Mormon because it was a free book. So, but
it was denied you.
It was denied to me, so I just wanted it so much, and I later on I found out that they changed those boys, and they were not all the same.
Yeah, obviously they're not doing their jobs. I think maybe missionaries could use a different tactic, which is, no, you can't have this.
Exactly.
You know what's in here, and then everybody will be like,
you want it.
Yeah. I love all of that. So in another one of your interviews, I was fascinated to learn that you practiced all of your fiction writing in English because there were no Spanish writers groups. And I'm wondering if you think you would ever translate your own work.
Oh my goodness, that is a dream of mine. In fact, I already had the opportunity to translate Where Are You From into De Donde Eres. And my next picture book, What Will You Be, is ¿Qué serás in Spanish, and I did the translation. Granted, those are only 250 word books. And it is my dream because it was a very surreal experience to be writing Furia in English while giving the illusion that everything is happening in Spanish, because most of the book happens in Argentina, where everybody speaks Spanish. And seeing the reaction from readers in Argentina who had access to it in English, just begging for this book to be translated into Spanish, has been, I think, the most rewarding part of the whole thing after Furia came out. And there's nothing concrete yet, but I know there are things happening in the backstage between my publisher, and because there is a lot of interest. Unfortunately, when I go back to Argentina, I always go to the bookstore and the library, and a lot of the books we have I'm always happy to see my friends being translated into Spanish, but there's not a lot of original YA books coming out from Argentine authors, although there is a very rich tradition of young adult literature in Spanish, because I grew up with it. I know there was, but now what you find in the stores is just translated works. So I know there is a demand and a desire for people to be able to read stories like Furia that reflect the everyday life of Argentine or Latin American society. So I hope that in the future there will be bookshelves filled with stories like Camila's, and I would love to do my own translation. It takes a very different skill set to translate than to write. But I did work as a translator and interpreter for 10 years before I became an author. So I'm ready for it.
I hope it happens. I think that would be absolutely amazing. Let's see. I want to give time for the audience to ask questions. So I'll ask you, Mate plays a big role in the book as sort of just like cozy tradition. And I always felt myself like nestling up with the book a little bit more whenever they were drinking it. And I am a big tea drinker. And I hear you have an example for us.
I have an example right here. It happens.
Oh, look at that.
It happens. I was telling Christian before we went live that I always have my mate next to me. And yesterday for my event with Kate Parker was the first time that I did it. And she asked me for a demonstration. I said, I'm sorry, I don't have it next to me, but I do today. And that's why now I'm like always gonna have it. So mate refers to the herbal drink. The herb is yerba mate. It's spelled with a Y, and in Argentina, we say the Y is like an SH. So yerba mate can be the little loose tea that you see inside. This is just a stainless steel cup. It's special because my friends from high school sent it to me when I got married a long time ago. And this is my favorite mate. And so I'm gonna do something unforgivable for Argentine people, which is pull out the straw or bombilla, but I wanna show you. And so the straw is just, the bombilla is a straw with a filter. And then you put it in the loose tea, and then you pour hot water. You let it seep and absorb the water, and then you just drink it. I don't put sugar in it anymore because I drink mate all day long. Once you are past a certain age, you can't do sugar so much. So now it is Splenda or just plain mate. Sometimes we put peppermint leaves or dry lemon peel or even dry grapefruit peel. What else do we put in it? Sometimes people put coffee grounds, a little bit of coffee. I just like my mate plain. I know here in the US for the last couple of years, it's become a very famous or popular energy drink, kind of like Red Bull. So you will find it at the health store in a can. For me, that's an abomination. Yeah. My kids drink it, but I can't do cold drinks that are meant to be hot. So I don't like iced coffee. I don't like iced tea. I just like my hot drinks hot. And so what you do with mate is you just drink the whole thing. You put more water and you pass it to the same person. Anti-COVID drink. Like COVID has wrecked our Argentine culture because we don't all have our own little gourd or mate cup. You pass it around, you drink the whole thing. You have a mate circle. There's one assigned person to serve it, and you go counterclockwise. When you're done, you say thank you. And saying thank you means that you are satisfied in that round of mate. But mate is called the drink of friendship. And it's the equalizer because you will find it in the homes of the rich and the poor, the young and the old. There are those weirdo Argentines who don't drink mate, but I don't trust those people.
Just looking at the quality of that cup and the traditions and all of that, I need to up my tea game.
Oh, mate comes in little tea bags. So sometimes you can just put it in, like a cup and sip it in. And that's how my daughters prefer it. And that's how traditions evolve. And it's a beauty to see. I don't share their taste, but I love how they make their chai with mate cocido. It's called when it's in a teacup and they put cream or milk and vanilla and sugar. And it's like their little Starbucks drink.
Is it just basically like drowning out those initial flavors as much as they possibly can?
Yes.
Is it superstition about taking the straw out?
Yes, because when you take it out, the mate gets ruined. It's like, how can I say? We call it, the mate gets cortado. It gets cut up. So I can show you now, and I don't know if maybe I should have a little detachable camera for these purposes, but you can see here, perfect. Now it's nice and pretty, has the little bubbles. This is like the perfect mate. That's why the water can be boiling, because boiling water will strip all of the flavor in the first mate or two. You want the mate to remain like bubbly and as thick as possible. for the longest period of time. And that's why when Camila and Diego have been drinking for a while, she says, oh, el mate está cortado, which means that you can only see the little sticks floating in plain water. And that's when it's time to change the yerba and you continue drinking mate.
Wow, I love that. Well, I have a couple more questions, but I think we should throw it to the audience, and then if there's any time left over, then I'll pick up. So I want to give them a chance. Welcome back, Salem.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Thank you both so much again. Yeah, that was a beautiful conversation. I loved hearing about your creative process. And I have a couple questions for you. First, would like to know, were there any books that you read when you were growing up that really resonated with you and that dealt with similar themes? If so, what were they? And if not, like, what books do you wish were available to you when you were growing up?
Well, like I mentioned in passing, Argentine culture, we have a wealth of amazing writers like Borges and Cortázar, and then lesser known women authors who wrote throughout the military dictatorship and were banned and their lives were at risk, but they kept writing. They wrote about everyday life in Argentina. One of them was called Alma Maritano, and she was also from my city of Rosario. Another one was called Maria Elena Walsh, and she had to leave Argentina during the dictatorship, and she lived in Sweden for a long time. And she also became the recipient of the Astrid Lindgren Medal. So she is known all over the world, and sadly, a lot of her works are not translated into English. But growing up in Argentina, you have the nursery rhymes. We had the nursery rhymes that Maria Elena wrote. And then when I grew up, I just loved, I was a voracious reader in the sense that I read everything. So a book that kind of changed my life, it's so random. It was called Illusions, Adventures of a Messiah by Richard Bach. That came, and he wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Yeah.
So I took it from my aunt's bookshelf, never gave it back. I must have been 11, and I remember marking like, you can manifest your own reality. And I laugh at little Yamile. But who's to say that what I'm living right now are not the manifestations of an 11-year-old? You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I love that. And then also wanted to ask, do you have any other projects that you're working on right now?
Yes. And it's funny because I'm always working on something new. And I don't know how it happened, but I have stories at different publishing houses that have their own schedules. So I do have a new middle grade book coming out with HarperCollins on January 5th, Shaking Up the House. A new picture book with HarperCollins as well called What Will You Be? And then another middle grade with Scholastic coming out in August that's called Wish Upon a Stray. And it has been so much fun. And I'm always working on something, and my editor at Algonquin and I have not really decided on the next YA, but I am working on a couple of things that I'm very excited about. And I just have too many things to say.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then to round us off, yeah, Christian, did you have any other questions for Yamile?
I absolutely do.
Wonderful.
So to start, you mentioned that hashtag We Need Diverse Writers, Own Voices began in 2015, a full 5 years ago. And once again, showing my interest, a couple years ago, I thought like, oh, it's being solved. It's happening. And then I saw some data that talked about, you know, how there was still a huge imbalance for authors of color in the industry. And so I was wondering if you would talk about your perception of the children's landscape or YA landscape today, and how you think it's doing in terms of diversity.
Well, there have definitely been advances. From the moment I started writing more than 10 years ago to now, there have been just a lot of growth in leaps and bounds. At the same time, just because there are a few stories, and I'm sure we can all think of these big titles that have been bestsellers for a long time, have been adapted into movies, sometimes as a public, we get complacent and think, okay, things are leveled up. But if you really start paying attention, it's just the same stories that, like just the one or two that keep being marketed, whereas the rest keep being pushed aside. I think the big change, more than from the industry itself, like publishing as a machinery, has to come from the readers. Because ultimately, although I wrote Furia and I write my books and my characters are girls of color living either here in the US or outside of the US, I do hope that everybody will read them, that no matter what your background is or your gender identity or orientation or your dreams and hopes, that you will find something that will resonate with you in all of my work. I do hope that men read Furia and boys read Furia, not only the girls, and you don't need to love soccer. Somebody else said on Twitter that a lot of sports stories are really not about the sport. The sport's just a vehicle through which to show the character's journey. And that's definitely it for Furia. So you don't need to love soccer or sports at all to have something that for the story to resonate with you. And even if you're not, we use the phrase from Dr. Rudin Sims, windows and mirrors. My books will be mirrors for some people that share a similar background as mine, and there will be windows for the majority of the other people who have not the same background as mine, and they will be able to peek into somebody else's world. But I grew up, I keep thinking of oh my goodness, I'm blanking out on this film director who won for Roma. Cuarón?
Oh, is it Pedro?
Pedro?
No. Let's see. I know his name. Alfonso Cuarón.
Alfonso Cuarón. Okay, and he grew up watching
Almodovar for
yes,
some reason.
Almodovar, Spain. Yes, and he's from Mexico, and he said that when he won the award for Best Director and Best Movie, that he grew up watching foreign films. And then he started mentioning of Jaws. I say Shark because that was the title in Spanish. Jaws and all these movies from the US that from our perspective in Latin America, they were foreign movies. And so when you switch that point of view, you realize that we're not the center of the world. and it's okay. And it's fine that we are always enriched when we try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and get another understanding of what they're going through. And the other thing is this, sometimes we equate these stories of people of color to stories of struggle and pain. And there is a place for them. And it's necessary for us to know the history of our continent and understand the pain that a lot of people went through. But again, there is something revolutionary about seeing people of color, Black people, Indigenous people being happy, fulfilling their dreams, having adventures, being kids, just doing kid things without worrying about their immigration status. So it's important to open our perspective that we need to see stories of people from different backgrounds from every point of view, and it's fun because I don't like to read the same thing over and over. Sometimes I do go back to my favorite book, but my favorite part about reading is to lose myself into a world that I hadn't met before and to see the world from somebody else's perspective. Because again, like writing is my opportunity to create a virtual reality. Lisa Cron said that reading is our original virtual reality, that you can just experience what somebody else goes through when you open the pages of a book. And so that's what I'm hoping. And I think there is still a lot of work to do. I could go on and on this topic forever, because the main issue that I see when I go to school visits is that we have multiple books by Latino authors who've been awarded the Newbery Honor or the Newbery Medal. And so when I go to schools and I mention them, I'm always heartbroken when I realize that the teachers and librarians have never heard of them. So, and it kills me every time. And so we have the stories. Now we have to get them into the hands of children and young readers. And I think that's the hardest part of the whole thing. As hard as it is to write a book and have it published and then win a big award, but even if it's a book that doesn't win a big award, getting it into the hands of our young readers is the next step. And I feel like there is a disconnection there in that process. And a lot of people like hero teachers and librarians are doing all they can, but we can still do a little more.
Well, Shamila, your work absolutely is a window for me, and it teaches me so much, and the writing is so strong, and I could go on for a very, very long time. And I'm so excited for more and more readers to discover your work. And I know that it's happening, and I can't wait to see that continue to pick up momentum, and for you to just change a lot of perceptions for a lot of people.
Thank you, Christian. And the best part of the whole journey has been meeting people like you. Starting out, and it's amazing to see the amazing things that we can do with, I mean, writing has given me a wonderful life, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I have to have really the best job in the world.
I feel the same way, and I'm honored to know you, and I can't wait to just see what happens next.
Thank you. Likewise.
Now I have something in my eye. Oh God, thank you both so much. This was a lovely, beautiful conversation. Again, you can buy this from our store. I'm going to be leaving links as soon as we sign off to Yamile and Christian's websites and our website where you can order Furia. Thank you both so much for talking with us today. And before we sign off, I just want to say to our audience, thank you for tuning in as well. Be sure to wear a mask in public. None of us are wearing masks right now because we are in our homes, but it is important to do. Yes.
We're not sharing mate.
No, we're not sharing mate.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.